Hello, I'm happy to welcome everyone at the day two of our 5-day event. There is quite a lot that can be discussed, and it's hard to try to fit it all in a brief talk, but I'll try to keep it short and sweet and focus on the key aspects that are quite interesting in terms of the role of civil society, the way that societies or citizens all over the world were acting and reacting during the pandemic, and the means and methods that are being used or can be used or are highly likely to be used in the future while defining the so-called new norm. So it's quite clear, I assume, to everyone and everyone listening to the speeches of this event right now that the world has been changing ever since the pandemic started, not just only because it was the first episode of the kind, let's say, in the recent and not just recent history, when the whole world was to react somehow to a challenge that was basically affecting everyone's life and changing lifestyles of people all over the world. But also, it was quite interesting to observe how the governments were reacting, what kind of restrictions were being introduced. And obviously, it caused a lot of people to ask a lot of why questions at this level, because we see, if we just follow the statistics, and if we just follow the numbers that have been growing for a while globally, numbers of people having the infection, numbers of people recovering, numbers of people who unfortunately were passing away, we could see that it's not always correlating with the measures taken by governments. So if we look at the map of the world, we will see that some countries would choose to go on quite strict lockdowns right after it started, and that was the case, for instance, in many African countries when the numbers would just hit around like 50 or 100 cases, and the countries would already go on strict lockdowns with police and military patrols. Then at the same time, we have examples of countries such as Sweden or Belarus, or we have examples of Mongolia, where official statistics would say that there are just a few cases, and all of them, as it's being said, are brought from abroad, which means that they have not reported any cases affecting the locals in Mongolia. And so then we look at the measures taken, and in some cases, the states would introduce state of emergencies, limiting civil kind of like basic rights and freedoms down to almost zero, when people are not allowed to go outside. And we've seen, such regulations starting from Spain, and Spain and Italy were the first countries to introduce such measures. The UK has been also quite strict with its citizens, even though there was a major policy shift. So, well, basically, the brief conclusion here is just simply that it's not the numbers and it's not the, like the healthcare situation that is the key factor in this. And then we could also observe, looking at what local governments do and some of the governments do, is that sometimes more restrictive preventive measures are just simply dictated by fear, not to get infection, to limit down the possibilities of people getting infected and whatsoever. But even from some of the comments coming from doctors and experts in healthcare and infectionists and other specialists, it's quite clear that such a disease is not maybe, this is just one of the, let's say, opinions voiced, but it's not enough of a threat to limit down all the possible activities, including economic activities and everything else. So it was also quite interesting to observe and do some research on how the society was reacting to such a situation when simple logic couldn't really explain what was actually happening and why the government was taking, those or, one or another set of decisions. So a lot of people started questioning the situation, questioning the system, and some of the people were coming to a conclusion that maybe too much power was delegated to the governments when their entire life, from professional to personal to just a simple possibility to go out and take a walk and walk your dog, your children, or whatsoever, has become very problematic. So at the same time, knowing that the governments had to be working in this emergency situation, kind of like patterns, they obviously couldn't cover all the needs and all the issues arising during the pandemic. So here again, we saw quite a lot of examples of civic initiatives coming up in order to fix the issues and address the problems directly. So here, globally, we saw a huge increase in this. So there are quite a lot of examples of people making masks and distributing them, trying to address the issues of the poor, of the elderly, trying to make sure that the groceries are being delivered to them, that they're taken care of when the state is not capable of doing that anymore. At the same time, we saw a huge increase in creative initiatives. We saw quite a lot of, activities aimed to fill those isolation days with arts and creativity and a lot of educational programs. So here, during the pandemic, it became quite clear that using the modern day technologies and digital technologies in the first place, it doesn't matter that much anymore where you're located and what you're generally doing, but what matters is the network that you address, the type of content you are focused on, and the goals that you're setting. So the let's say for a lot of people, their capacities have become much different, and the situation when the world went on self-isolation and maintenance, a lot of people were using this opportunity in order to reset their priorities, question their own professional lives. Sometimes that was forced, as a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of businesses had to either adapt or just simply shut down. But in these times of the pandemic, we could actually see that people-to-people diplomacy, that people-to-people networking, civil diplomacy, direct connections can take back, let's say, some of the functions that were monopolized in many cases by governments. So we could see that people's capacity to and communities' capacity to kind of like organize themselves, come up with the initiative, and actually implement it for the greater good is much more than we thought. And so I think what's one of the most important conclusions that we can make here in terms of the role of civil initiatives during the pandemic is that a lot of people, after they got into the situation, they realized that they can take a lot of their power and responsibility back in order to be able to redefine their professional performance, their personal lives as well, their belief systems and whatsoever, because it did create unique opportunities for that, just to reconnect with what's actually important. And unfortunately, well, the time here is a bit limited, so I'm not going to be going into much of examples, but those are the trends that are quite obvious all over the world, and we can see having spent this pandemic period here in Russia, I can also tell that even the regions of the country were reacting in a very different way. While Moscow had quite a lot of cases reported, like hundreds of thousands at the moment, more than 100,000. In St. Petersburg, the situation was very, very much different, and people were less likely to be given up on their rights. And even though regulations were coming out setting certain restrictions, still, the isolation regime was very much different. So here as well, we could observe a lot of very fast adapting businesses, a lot of civil initiatives being implemented in just 3-4 days, when people would organize themselves in order to solve a specific issue or problem. And we could see that happening in the European Union, in Africa. We could see that happening a lot in the United States, in Asia, basically all over the world. So concluding this part here, the key point that I wanted to make during this brief presentation is that when this is over, we still don't know if there will be the second wave that is being discussed by many experts. We're still not sure when it will be completely over. But I think that this splash or those splashes of civil activity and those circumstances that forced a lot of people to start perceiving their responsibility and shaping their immediate realities in a very different way would lead to a situation when the monopolized, let's say, power of the governments and other institutions would be questioned quite a lot. And we will see that if the society manages to articulate their interests and to share their conclusions and kind of like promote their vision, we will see a world that will be much more horizontal in terms of the power structures and the way that political systems and economic systems are shaped. So we already see quite a lot of examples of active civil diplomacy, direct connections between businesses, situations when competition is not as important as cooperation. And all those values, let's say, were brought back during the pandemic. So now the key point is, how it will be articulated and how far the people are ready to go in actually implementing those new strategies that they came up with during the pandemic. I'm hoping that this event as well would also allow to crystallize some of those ideas, some of the best practices that we were observing, and the outcome document that will be elaborated after this event is definitely one of the little steps being taken in order to shape the new norm, taking into consideration the experts' opinion and the activities of the citizens that were showing where they want to put their efforts and where their heart is telling them to go. Thanks a lot, and I think that's pretty much all I wanted to say right now. So thank you for joining the event.